"Sir, step away from the porch. You don't live here." The words cut through the quiet Saturday morning like a door slammed too hard in an otherwise peaceful neighborhood, and Darius Cole slowly lifted his eyes from the coffee cup resting in his hand, steam still curling into the cool suburban air as sunlight stretched across the neatly trimmed lawn in front of him. The police cruiser idled at the curb with its engine humming low, the reflection of blue decals gliding across the polished black railing of the two-story colonial behind him, a house that sat on nearly half an acre in one of the quietest cul-de-sacs outside Naperville, Illinois, where nothing louder than a lawn mower usually broke the silence, yet now the presence of uniformed authority shifted the atmosphere, thickening it, charging it, as Officer Bradley Monroe stepped forward with one hand resting casually near his belt, his posture calm but firm, his tone carrying the quiet assumption of someone used to being obeyed without question, and Darius didn't move, didn't argue. Didn't even change the relaxed posture he held in the Adirondack chair positioned perfectly to catch the morning sun, his gray hoodie simple, his athletic sneakers resting lightly on the wooden planks that had been freshly sealed just 2 weeks earlier, a detail he noticed absent-mindedly as the officer took another step closer, the faint creak of leather shoes on wood echoing louder than it should have, while across the street, a curtain shifted, then another, neighbors sensing the tension. Before understanding it, curiosity spreading faster than explanation, and still Darius remained calm, as if he had seen this moment before, as if he had lived it in different forms across different cities and different decades, the officer clearing his throat now, voice slightly firmer, "We've had a report about someone sitting on this property who doesn't belong here," and the phrasing lingered in the air, not loud, not aggressive, just heavy with implication, while a white SUV slowed at the corner, the driver glancing twice before continuing, and Darius took a quiet sip of coffee, the ceramic mug warm in his hands, the smell of roasted beans grounding him, his gaze drifting briefly across the neighborhood he had purchased into deliberately, carefully, after years of calculating every decision, every move, every investment that had led him here, and still the officer continued, shifting weight slightly, "I'm going to need you to step off the porch and show me some identification," and the words landed softer this time but carried more authority, the kind that expected compliance without conversation, while another patrol car turned slowly into the cul-de-sac, not rushing, just present, adding gravity to the scene, and Darius finally looked up fully, calm eyes steady, not confrontational, not defensive, just measured, as if he were evaluating a business proposal rather than being told to leave the very porch beneath his feet, the morning breeze lifting the edge of a folded newspaper beside him, the headline unread, irrelevant, as the neighborhood held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next, and for a brief moment, the only sound left was the quiet ticking of a cooling engine and the distant bark of a dog 2 houses down, while Darius Cole remained seated, composed, and entirely unbothered, like a man who knew something no one else on that street knew yet. Officer Bradley Monroe studied Darius more carefully now, as if the calmness unsettled him more than resistance would have, his eyes scanning the gray hoodie, the clean but simple sneakers, the relaxed posture that did not match the expectations forming in his mind, and Darius slowly lowered his coffee cup onto the small wooden table beside him, the ceramic making a soft click against the surface, deliberate and unhurried, while the second patrol vehicle came to a stop 20 feet behind the first, its tires rolling gently over the smooth asphalt of the cul-de-sac, and another officer stepped out, a younger man with a cautious expression, adjusting his uniform as he approached, the quiet coordination between them signaling routine, yet the atmosphere felt anything but routine, because the stillness in Darius's demeanor refused to match the narrative already forming around him, and Monroe cleared his throat again, voice measured but firmer, asking, "Sir, do you have identification on you?" And Darius tilted his head slightly, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive, as though weighing the question with careful precision, and instead of reaching for his pocket, he asked calmly, "Is there a reason you believe I should not be here?" The question landing softly but carrying weight, forcing Monroe to pause for half a second before responding. "We received a call from a concerned neighbor," and the phrase hung in the air, vague and familiar, while across the street a garage door lifted halfway and then stopped, the homeowner peeking out cautiously, and another curtain shifted 2 houses down, the quiet suburban rhythm now fully disrupted, and Darius nodded slowly, absorbing the explanation, his gaze drifting briefly across the manicured lawn, the freshly edged walkway, the small American flag planted near the flower bed that fluttered lightly in the breeze. Details that spoke of ownership without needing to say it. And still he remained seated, his posture composed, his hands resting loosely on his knees, the younger officer now standing slightly behind Monroe, watching carefully, his radio crackling faintly before going silent again, and Monroe continued, "We just need to confirm everything," his tone softer now, but still carrying authority, and Darius responded with the same calm presence, "I understand," yet he did not move to stand, did not reach for his wallet, instead maintaining the quiet control of someone who had navigated moments like this before, and in the distance a jogger slowed along the sidewalk, earbuds dangling as curiosity pulled him into the scene, the quiet tension spreading outward like ripples in still water, and Monroe shifted his weight again, glancing briefly at the house behind Darius, its tall windows reflecting the morning sun, the front door painted deep navy, the brass numbers polished and visible, and for a brief second the officer's confidence flickered, not because anything had changed, but because nothing had changed. Darius remained calm, unbothered, grounded in a way that made the authority of the moment feel uncertain, and then Monroe spoke again, more directly this time, "Sir, I am going to ask you one more time to step off the porch," and the quiet request carried an expectation, but Darius simply leaned back slightly in the chair, the wood creaking gently beneath him, his eyes steady, his voice even, "Officer, I am comfortable right here," and the word settled over the cul-de-sac like a shift in gravity, subtle yet unmistakable, as the morning sunlight stretched further across the porch, illuminating the calm figure seated at the center of a moment that was only beginning to unfold. Officer Bradley Monroe exhaled slowly, the patience in his posture beginning to thin as the quiet resistance continued, and he glanced briefly toward the younger officer beside him, a silent exchange passing between them before Monroe stepped slightly closer to the bottom of the porch steps, the polished wood catching the morning light as he spoke again, his voice calm but edged with firmness, "Sir, we are trying to resolve this quickly," and Darius remained seated, his hands resting loosely on the armrests, his expression thoughtful, almost reflective, as though he were observing the situation from a distance rather than standing at the center of it, while the jogger who had slowed earlier now stood near the mailbox across the street, pretending to stretch while watching openly, and a woman in a navy bathrobe stepped onto her driveway, her phone loosely held at her side, curiosity slowly replacing hesitation, and the younger officer spoke for the first time, his tone measured, "We just need to confirm you belong here," the phrase landing awkwardly, the word belong lingering longer than intended, and Darius tilted his head slightly, his eyes moving from one officer to the other before drifting briefly across the quiet street, the rows of identical mailboxes, the trimmed hedges, the stillness of a neighborhood that had not expected this moment, and he responded calmly, "That is an interesting choice of words." And Monroe shifted his stance again, his hand resting lightly on his hip as he replied, "It is just procedure," but the explanation sounded thinner than before, as if even he sensed the weight of the assumption beneath it. And from 2 houses down, a garage door opened fully this time, revealing an older man stepping out slowly, his gaze fixed on the scene, and the atmosphere grew heavier, the quiet morning now layered with attention, and Monroe spoke again, "If you can just step down here, we can clear this up," and Darius leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees, the movement slow and deliberate, his voice calm, "Officer, I am already where I need to be," and the words settled with quiet confidence, causing the younger officer to glance at Monroe again, uncertainty flickering briefly before disappearing, and Monroe nodded once, as if making a decision, then spoke into his radio in a low voice, requesting confirmation of the address, the faint static filling the air before fading again, and the woman in the bathrobe lifted her phone higher now, not aggressively, just documenting, her expression uncertain, and Darius noticed but did not react, his focus returning to the officers. The morning sunlight now stretching across the porch floor, illuminating the quiet stillness of the moment, and Monroe looked back up at him, his tone now slightly sharper, "Sir, we have a report that this property belongs to someone else," and that sentence shifted the gravity of the scene, the assumption no longer subtle, and Darius's expression remained unchanged, his voice even, "Reports can be mistaken," and the calm reply seemed to unsettle the air again, the jogger lowering his arms, the older man stepping closer to the sidewalk, the neighborhood slowly forming an audience, while Monroe studied Darius carefully, as if searching for something that would confirm his expectations, but finding none, and the silence stretched for a moment longer, the quiet hum of the patrol car filling the gap, as the tension in the cul-de-sac deepened, and Darius Cole remained seated, composed, and unwavering, like a man who understood that the moment unfolding in front of him was not about a porch, but about something far larger that had yet to be revealed. The quiet stretched just long enough for the neighborhood to shift from curiosity to quiet judgment, and the older man who had stepped out of his garage finally moved closer to the edge of his driveway, his arms folded loosely as he looked toward the officers and then toward Darius, his expression thoughtful, uncertain, before he spoke in a careful tone that carried across the still morning air, "I have seen him here before," and the words landed gently but noticeably, causing Officer Monroe to glance toward him, while the younger officer turned his head slightly, the dynamic shifting in subtle ways that no one could ignore, and Monroe nodded once, acknowledging the comment but not fully embracing it, asking, "How long have you seen him here?" And the older man shrugged lightly, "A few weeks, maybe more," and that answer lingered, neither definitive nor dismissive, while the woman in the navy bathrobe stepped a little closer to the sidewalk, her voice hesitant but clear, "I think I saw him last weekend too," and suddenly the quiet certainty that had framed the officer's arrival began to soften, replaced by uncertainty that spread like sunlight across the cul-de-sac, and Darius remained seated, his calm unchanged, his gaze drifting briefly toward the neighbors who had begun to speak, his expression still composed, appreciative but restrained, while the jogger nodded slightly, adding quietly, "Yeah, I remember seeing him early one morning," and Monroe listened, his posture adjusting, his confidence recalibrating as the assumptions surrounding the moment began to loosen, yet procedure held him in place, and he spoke. Again, his tone measured, "We still need to confirm ownership," and the words sounded less certain now, more procedural than authoritative, while the younger officer shifted his stance, glancing back toward the patrol car as the radio crackled faintly again, and across the street another front door opened slowly, a young couple stepping onto their porch, drawn by the unfolding moment, their eyes moving from the officers to Darius, then back again, and the atmosphere transformed into something quieter but heavier, no longer about suspicion alone but about observation, reflection, and realization, and Darius leaned back slightly in his chair, his fingers resting lightly against the armrest, the calmness in his posture becoming more pronounced as the attention around him grew, while Monroe looked up toward the house behind Darius once more, taking in the freshly painted shutters, the clean stone walkway, the small delivery box near the door with a shipping label still attached, details that suggested someone had been living there, maintaining it, shaping it, and the officer's gaze lingered for a brief moment before returning to Darius, who met his eyes calmly, saying nothing, allowing the silence to carry the weight of the moment, and the older man spoke again, softer this time, "He does not look like someone who wandered in," and that sentence shifted the air again, subtle but meaningful, and Monroe exhaled slowly, his tone now more cautious, "We are just making sure," and Darius nodded once, acknowledging the process without surrendering his calm, while the sunlight stretched further across the porch, illuminating the still figure seated at the center of a neighborhood. Slowly realizing that what they were witnessing was not just a routine check, but a moment where assumptions were quietly unraveling, one voice at a time. Officer Monroe listened as the quiet voices from the neighbors settled into the morning air, and for the first time since stepping out of his patrol car, his posture softened slightly, though the weight of procedure still anchored him in place, and he glanced once more at the house behind Darius, the clean symmetry of the windows, the freshly trimmed hedges, the subtle signs of ownership that now felt harder to ignore. Yet the radio at his shoulder crackled softly, breaking the silence, and he lifted it closer, listening carefully as dispatch responded with partial information about the property, the address confirmed, but ownership details still pending, and Monroe nodded faintly, lowering the radio as he spoke again, his voice measured but more cautious than before, "Sir, we are still waiting on confirmation," and Darius inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the update, his calm demeanor unchanged, his hands resting comfortably as if the entire moment were unfolding at his own pace, and the younger officer shifted his stance. Again, glancing briefly at the growing number of neighbors now quietly observing, the jogger standing near the curb, the older man leaning against his mailbox, the young couple watching from their porch, and the woman in the navy bathrobe lowering her phone just slightly, her expression thoughtful, and the morning sunlight now stretched across nearly the entire porch, illuminating the wooden boards beneath Darius's feet, the stillness of his presence becoming more pronounced as the tension slowly evolved from suspicion to uncertainty, and Monroe cleared his throat again, choosing his words carefully. "Did you recently move in?" And Darius responded calmly, "I have been here long enough," and the answer carried quiet confidence, neither defensive nor explanatory, and Monroe nodded once, though the response did not fully satisfy the procedural framework guiding him, and in that moment, Darius's gaze drifted briefly toward the street, the quiet suburban setting reminding him of another morning years earlier, a memory surfacing without warning, the faint echo of a different neighborhood, a smaller house, a younger version of himself standing outside a property he had just purchased after saving for years, only to be asked by a passerby if he was delivering something, the assumption casual but familiar, and he remembered the silence he chose then, the decision to respond with patience rather than frustration, and the memory faded as quickly as it arrived, replaced by the present moment, the officers still standing, the neighbors still watching, and Monroe spoke again, his tone softer now. "We just want to make sure everything is correct," and Darius nodded once more, the calmness in his expression steady, as if he understood that the moment unfolding was less about confirmation and more about perception, and the younger officer glanced again at the house, then back at Darius, his uncertainty more visible now, while the quiet hum of the patrol car continued in the background, and Monroe lifted his radio again, requesting full ownership records this time, his voice low and controlled, and as he waited for the response, the cul-de-sac settled into a quiet anticipation. The neighbors holding their positions, the sunlight warming the pavement, and Darius Cole remained seated at the center of it all, composed and unwavering, like someone who knew that the next few moments would quietly change the direction of everything unfolding around him. The radio on Officer Monroe's shoulder crackled again, this time longer, the faint static filling the quiet cul-de-sac as everyone seemed to lean into the silence without realizing it, and Monroe lifted the radio closer, his expression tightening slightly as he listened, his eyes shifting briefly toward the house behind Darius before returning to the unseen voice speaking through the static, while the younger officer stood still beside him, hands loosely at his sides, his gaze moving between Monroe and Darius as the moment stretched, and across the street the neighbors remained quietly gathered, the jogger now standing still, the older man resting his hands on top of his mailbox, the young couple leaning slightly forward on their porch railing, all waiting for something they could not yet define, and Monroe finally responded into the radio, confirming the address once more, his tone careful, controlled, and then silence followed again, heavier now, the kind that settles just before something shifts, and Darius remained seated, his calm presence unchanged, his eyes drifting briefly toward the sunlight creeping further across the wooden boards beneath his feet, the warmth of the morning steady and grounding, and after a moment he reached slowly toward the small table beside him, picking up his phone with an unhurried motion, the gesture subtle but noticeable, and Monroe's eyes flicked toward the movement, not suspicious but attentive, as Darius unlocked the screen and scrolled briefly, his expression thoughtful, composed, and then he placed the phone to his ear, his voice quiet, measured. "Good morning, I need you to pull the property file for the Maple Ridge address," and he listened calmly, nodding once, the conversation brief, efficient, as though this moment were simply another item in a long list of routine decisions, and Monroe watched, his posture shifting slightly, uncertainty now more visible in the space between assumption and confirmation, while the younger officer glanced toward Monroe again, sensing the shift without fully understanding it, and Darius lowered the phone after a few seconds, placing it gently back on the table, his gaze returning to the officers, his calm unwavering, and Monroe spoke again, his tone softer now. "Who were you calling?" And Darius answered evenly, "Someone who handles my records," and the response settled into the quiet air, not confrontational, not defensive, just factual, and the neighbors exchanged subtle glances, the older man raising his eyebrows slightly, the jogger shifting his weight, the young couple whispering briefly to one another, and Monroe nodded slowly, absorbing the information, his earlier certainty continuing to soften, while the radio crackled once more, and Monroe lifted it again, listening carefully as dispatch began reading ownership details, the words coming slowly through the static, and Monroe's expression changed almost imperceptibly, his shoulders relaxing a fraction, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed what he was hearing, and the younger officer noticed, his gaze sharpening, while the quiet hum of the patrol car continued in the background, and Darius Cole remained seated, composed and still, like someone who already understood that the next word spoken through that radio would quietly redefine the moment unfolding on his own front porch. Officer Monroe held the radio closer as dispatch continued speaking, the static fading just enough for the words to come through clearly, and his expression shifted in a way that did not go unnoticed, the subtle tightening around his eyes replaced by something quieter, more cautious, as he listened to the name being read back, the registered owner listed under a holding company he did not immediately recognize, followed by a second line that clarified the primary authorized occupant, and Monroe blinked once, processing the information as the younger officer leaned slightly closer, trying to read the change in his partner's posture, while the neighbors across the street watched silently, the stillness deepening as if the entire cul-de-sac understood that something important had just been revealed, and Monroe pressed the radio button again, his voice lower now, confirming the spelling of the name, repeating it carefully, and when dispatch confirmed once more, Monroe lowered the radio slowly, his gaze lifting toward Darius with a noticeably different expression, no longer guided by assumption but by verification, and Darius met his eyes calmly, the quiet confidence in his posture unchanged, while Monroe cleared his throat, choosing his words carefully. "Sir, can you confirm your full name for me?" And Darius responded without hesitation, his voice even and composed, "Darius Cole," and the words settled into the air with quiet finality, causing the younger officer to glance quickly at Monroe, recognition forming in the space between them, while the older man near the mailbox shifted his stance, sensing the shift even without hearing the radio conversation, and Monroe nodded slowly, absorbing the confirmation, his shoulders relaxing slightly as the tension that had guided his arrival began to dissolve, and at that moment Darius reached once more for his phone, the screen lighting softly in his hand, and he turned it slightly, scrolling to an email that had just arrived, his movement unhurried, deliberate, and then he stood for the first time, not abruptly but calmly, stepping forward just enough to remain on the porch while holding the phone outward, the display visible without aggression, and Monroe leaned forward slightly, reading the document displayed on the screen, the official county header, the property address, and beneath it the ownership record clearly listing Ellington Ridge Holdings, followed by the managing partner name, Darius Cole, and the silence that followed stretched across the cul-de-sac like a held breath, the neighbors watching, the younger officer standing still, the morning sunlight reflecting off the phone screen as Monroe studied the details. And Darius spoke softly, his tone measured, "That is the deed," and Monroe nodded once, slowly, his expression shifting fully now from suspicion to understanding, while the younger officer exhaled quietly, glancing toward the house and then back at Darius, and across the street the woman in the navy bathrobe lowered her phone slightly, the jogger relaxing his stance, the quiet tension dissolving into realization, and Darius remained composed, his voice calm as he added, "I moved in 3 weeks ago," and Monroe nodded again, the authority in his posture now replaced by professionalism, the moment settling into clarity, as the porch, the house, and the quiet street returned to their natural balance, and Darius Cole stood calmly at the center of it all, the deed in hand, the truth quietly changing everything without a single raised voice. Officer Monroe stepped back slightly from the porch, the tension that had shaped his posture dissolving into quiet professionalism, and he nodded once more as he looked at Darius, his voice calm and measured, "Thank you for clarifying that, sir," and the shift in tone was unmistakable, no longer edged with suspicion but grounded in respect, while the younger officer adjusted his stance, glancing briefly at the house again as if seeing it differently now, the same white trim, the same polished railing, yet no longer framed by uncertainty, and across the street the neighbors relaxed visibly, the jogger lowering his arms fully, the older man near the mailbox nodding faintly as if confirming what he had already sensed, and the woman in the navy bathrobe lowered her phone entirely, her expression softening as the quiet resolution unfolded, and Monroe spoke into his radio again, his voice steady, confirming that the situation had been resolved, the faint crackle answering back before fading into silence, and the second patrol vehicle idled quietly behind them, its presence no longer heavy but routine, and Darius lowered his phone, stepping back slightly onto the porch, his calm demeanor unchanged, as though the entire exchange had simply passed through the morning without altering his pace, and Monroe glanced once more at the house, then back at Darius, his expression thoughtful, "It looks like everything checks out," and Darius nodded politely, his voice even. "I appreciate you verifying it," and the professionalism in his response mirrored Monroe's shift. The moment now defined by clarity rather than confrontation, while the younger officer gave a small nod, acknowledging the confirmation, and the cul-de-sac seemed to breathe again, the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood slowly returning, a distant lawn mower starting somewhere beyond the street, birds moving between trees, the sunlight warming the pavement, and Monroe adjusted his stance, his tone respectful. "Have a good morning, sir." And Darius responded calmly, "You as well." The exchange, simple but meaningful, and as Monroe turned slightly toward his patrol car, the older man across the street raised a hand in a subtle greeting toward Darius, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement, and the young couple on the porch exchanged a brief glance before stepping back toward their front door, their curiosity satisfied, while the jogger resumed a slow stretch before continuing down the sidewalk. And Monroe opened the door of his patrol vehicle, pausing for a moment as if reflecting, then stepping inside, the engine humming softly as the car began to roll forward, followed by the second vehicle, both easing out of the cul-de-sac without urgency, and Darius remained on the porch, the quiet returning around him, the house standing still in the morning light, and the neighborhood settling back into its calm rhythm, yet the moment lingered in the air, not loud, not dramatic, but quietly significant, as the assumptions that had brought authority to his doorstep dissolved into understanding, and Darius Cole lifted his coffee cup once more, the steam faint now, the morning fully restored, the porch once again exactly where he belonged. The patrol cars disappeared slowly around the corner, their presence fading into the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood, and the cul-de-sac returned to the kind of stillness it had known just minutes earlier, yet something subtle had shifted, something unspoken that lingered in the warm morning air as Darius Cole stood quietly on his porch, the coffee cup resting in his hand. The sunlight now fully stretching across the wooden boards beneath his feet, and across the street the older man by the mailbox gave a small nod before turning back toward his driveway, while the jogger continued down the sidewalk at an easy pace, and the young couple closed their front door gently, the quiet resolution settling naturally into the calm suburban routine, and Darius lowered himself back into the chair, the wood creaking softly beneath him, his gaze drifting across the neighborhood he had carefully chosen, the manicured lawns, the parked cars, the stillness that had drawn him here in the first place, and he took a slow sip of coffee, now warm instead of hot, the moment allowing him to reflect, not with frustration, but with the quiet understanding that moments like this were rarely about one person or one porch, but about perception, expectation, and the quiet assumptions that shaped everyday interactions, and he remembered the smaller house years earlier, the cautious looks, the questions that sounded harmless but carried weight, and he remembered deciding then that calm would always be his response, patience his strategy, and dignity his answer, and the breeze moved gently through the trees lining the street, leaves rustling softly as if the neighborhood itself exhaled, and a delivery truck rolled slowly past the entrance of the cul-de-sac before continuing on, the ordinary rhythm of the morning returning completely, yet the significance of what had just happened remained, quiet but powerful, because nothing dramatic had occurred, no raised voices, no confrontation, only calm presence, quiet proof, and truth revealed in its own time, and Darius glanced once more at the front door behind him, the polished brass numbers catching the sunlight, a simple reminder of ownership that did not require explanation, and he leaned back in his chair, his posture relaxed, the calm confidence that had guided him through the entire exchange still present, and the neighborhood carried on around him, unaware that in less than half an hour, a quiet moment on a suburban porch had unfolded into something deeper, something that reminded everyone who witnessed it that dignity did not need volume, and respect did not require introduction, and as the morning settled fully into place, Darius Cole sat comfortably where he belonged, the porch steady beneath him, the house behind him, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the strongest statement was simply remaining calm while the truth spoke for itself.